Hey everyone, and welcome to Building SaaS on AWS with me, Gunnar Grosch, developer advocate here at AWS. And this is our bi-weekly show where I bring on SaaS experts to talk about specific SaaS topics. And this week is a very special episode of Building SaaS on AWS because this week I don't have one guest, I don't have two guests, I have four guests on. So I'm joined today by Gwen, by Anthony, by Shira, and by Bill. So welcome all.
Okay.
Hi.
Oh, good to see everybody.
So this is our experts, our SaaS experts panel. So this week we're going to spend the entire hour just answering questions from you, the viewers. We normally answer questions from you, try to make it interactive, but this is a super interactive episode. And we have some questions we've already received from the viewers, but besides that, just pop any SaaS-related question you might have into the chat, and well, the panel of experts will do their best to answer those. And to kick things off, let's do the regular round of introductions, and I think we'll start with our community guests first. So, Gwen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here, Gunnar. I am Gwen. I am currently co-founder of a startup, SaaS type of startup called the Nile Platform. And before that, I worked on Cloud Native Kafka at Confluent, and that's where I learned how to build and scale and grow SaaS services. I also run the SaaS developer community. I'm sure there will be links somewhere. We have Slack, we have YouTube, we have a newsletter, we share things, we answer questions. Bill is there answering AWS questions from time to time. And we would love to have everyone. If you listen to this, you probably will enjoy joining.
Great, thank you. Gwen, Shira, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here on the show. I think it's my first appearance on Twitch ever. So super proud and excited. I hope we have many listeners from the Twitch channel today. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Solvo. Solvo is a platform that helps organizations that are developing cloud-native applications to secure them automatically. This idea was born because me and my co-founder used to work for another cloud security company, and we would hear our customers complaining that most of the products they're working with are shouting alerts and notifications at them, but not really helping them to resolve that. So we at Solvo understand the pain of organizations that develop SaaS products. And this is why we decided to build a platform that analyzes your application and creates a least privilege security policy automatically. So we're doing everything we can, and we understand the pain of building a secure SaaS application, and I hope I can share some of our best practices and bad practices with you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And then on to our more recurring guests, I guess. Anthony, welcome again.
Thank you, Gunnar. Always a pleasure to be here, and good day to everybody that's joined in. Yes, my name is Anthony McClure. I am a solutions architect with the AWS SaaS Factory. And for those of you that may be new joining into the Twitch for the first time, just a quick thing about the SaaS Factory. The SaaS Factory, one of our main tenets is to be the place for SaaS. We want to see AWS become the most compelling place to build SaaS, deploy, and run SaaS applications. We do that through a number of different ways, including working through the AWS Partner Network, engaging directly with partners in direct engagements, but also helping to just boost general SaaS knowledge, providing lots of great content for our community to learn from, including speaking, videos, blog posts, all of that. And also building out ready-to-use resources like SaaS Boost, creating reference architectures, and also quick start guides. So lots of good content out there for you. I highly encourage you to go and visit us on our SaaS Factory website at AWS, and I'll make sure and put a link to that inside of the comments for you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And Bill, I think you can skip the SaaS Factory introduction now. Anthony covered it really well. I'm down to high on Bill. I think you've covered everything else, Anthony. Like, no,
Sorry, Bill.
No, it's great, and it was a great introduction. I've been with SaaS Factory for about 3 years. I worked with Anthony a lot. We have a lot of focus on startup, which is one of the reasons I'm really excited to have the guests we have on today. Shira running a startup, a successful startup, and Gwen running a community where I've met a lot of different startup founders who are participating in the SaaS developer community. So this is a really exciting panel for me. But yeah, SaaS Factory, I think you heard it already. Let's just move on.
All right. So welcome, Bill, as well. And great to see the chat already lighting up. We see a bunch of messages, people joining us from all over. We have people from Netherlands, from DC, from Florida, and so on. So even Kathmandu. Exciting. Chile.
Nice.
Cool.
Nice.
So we have a global audience today, and we also have a global panel. So I want to do a special call out to Gwen for waking up super early to join us today.
What about me? I get the call out.
I don't think you sleep, Bill, to be honest. I think it's not early, it's late for you, Bill.
Right.
Exactly.
So before jumping into the questions, I have a question for all of you. So we'll do another round of the panel. I want to ask you all what SaaS topics you're focused on right now. So Gwen, starting with you.
Yeah, for me, both because I'm an early stage startup and also because most of my design partners are early stage startups, I'm really looking at the early architectures of SaaS. What are the things you absolutely have to get right on day one, or things will become extremely painful later on? And I think there's like a few things that are so much easier to do correctly in the beginnings and migrate to the correct thing after you already have some things. Anything related to data architecture, a lot easier to get right the first times and do any kind of data migrations. Anything related, Shira is here, related to security, related things you need for SOC 2 are so much easier when you only have 2-3 services and maybe 1 or 2 databases, and when you have this microservices sprawl all over the place. And I really think that like the core decisions around the multi-tenant model, the multi-region model. Are you going to allow tenants to be in different regions? Are you going to allow them maybe to be even on-prem? Doing is really talk about this control plane architecture. And the moment you have your customers in a lot of different regions, or even their account, your account, their VPC, your VPC, you have all those different options. You really need a way to separate the tenants' life from your own things. It really brings you to the specific architectures, and it's better to build towards that early on, because splitting a database that was built as like this one big pool of tenants in one place can get extremely hairy if it's a lot of them.
That's great. And Shira, on to you. What are you focusing on right now?
I think that there is a lot of similarity between things that Gwen talked about and things that we're busy with right now, because designing and thinking about security is very similar to designing and thinking about architecture. Yes, you can just run and go ahead and do everything you used to do before, especially for the younger startups that are listening to us today. They are especially the ones that want to deliver as fast as possible, because this is what they're measured on right now, how fast they can make it to the market. So just like they might say, oh, I'm going to split the database later, let's just deliver this product now. In a similar way, we're seeing organizations saying, let's deliver this product, we will do security later. In the next sprint, we will do security. Yes, let me tell you the end of this story. It is not going to happen in the next sprint and not in the next one. So I know that it's really romantic to expect organizations, by the way, both young and more mature organizations, to start by doing the design and thinking about security as they write the first hello world of their application. But this is why we're here. Hopefully we could give you, we can give you 10 most important tips, but if our listeners are going to take 2 and implement them, it's going to be awesome. And hopefully we'll be able to give you some very easy to implement advice here today. So for Solvo, what we have in mind in terms of SaaS products is what are the pains and the barriers for organizations that are building SaaS products? What is stopping them from doing better security? And how can we automate this process for them? So we're building a SaaS platform for people who build a SaaS platform.
It's great. We want to get that security story out of the backlog and maybe have it on all of the stories in
Hopefully.
the
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Anthony, what about you?
Yeah, so one of my passions is learning and working on the very large subject of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we're seeing this quite often now, where customers are coming to us at the SaaS Factory that are looking to build not only multi-tenant solutions, but trying to understand how they can intermingle multi-tenancy along with machine learning. And there are different use cases that come along with that, very varied use cases in certain cases. And so that's quite interesting to me, mixing those two different domains together. And I've been very fortunate this year, so shameless reInvent plug on the way, that I actually am going to be able to host, along with another SA, Michael Beardsley, a Chalk Talk at reInvent, specifically on the subject of machine learning and multi-tenancy. And if you're not familiar with Chalk Talks, that is not so much just a presentation, but it's actually a conversation with those that are in the room. So we're very interested in hearing from the community on what the community is doing with machine learning and multi-tenancy as well, since we're all kind of learning this new environment together. So that's I would say that's probably my number one priority right at this moment. If you're interested in that Chalk Talk, I believe it's SAS 301. Unfortunately, we don't have direct links to sessions this year for some reason. But if you take a look for that one, you should be able to find it.
Maybe you can post the session ID in the chat, Anthony, for people to look it out. I see Stephen is guessing that the Chalk Talk is already full, but you'll just have to check, Stephen.
Yeah,
hopefully
it's a little bit. It's one that's a little bit later in the day, so you might want to take a look. It might be available still.
Yeah, right.
It's also worth to come as a walk-in, because sometimes people register and don't come. So highly recommended for people to come and just, try their luck.
Stephen is fortunate enough to be able to actually attend sessions this year. Stephen is an old colleague at AWS as well.
Hey.
So he can now actually attend sessions. All right, Bill, what about you then? What SaaS topic is top of mind right now?
So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say 3 because, like you said, I'm going to stick with my theme of never sleeping. I decided to sign up for 3 reInvent talks this year, which means I'm not going to sleep between now and the end of November. I'm just going to be planning these talks. But there are 3 really interesting topics. I really couldn't say no to any of them. The biggest one is extensibility. And it's a tough topic to get your head around in a lot of ways. If you look at the successful larger SaaS providers, a lot of them have communities of developers out there adding features to their applications. Think of Stripe, you think of Freshworks, Shopify. Some of these big SaaS providers are doing an amazing job lighting up their community and getting people involved. They've built all of these great tools. You could go develop a Shopify app, or if they want to call it an app or a marketplace app right now. With very little effort, just downloading their CLI, their tools. And it's amazing to see how companies have adapted this in different ways. You've got these external providers, including your community. And you've also got these sort of internal models that we're seeing as well, where companies are sort of creating an API-driven extensibility around their internal platforms outside of the community, right? Including third parties who want to build who want to include in their applications. All these really cool things that I don't want to give too much away, or else you're not going to come to see my talk, which is, I believe, 302, right after yours, Anthony, in the numbering. So definitely think about that a little bit. Really focus this year on compliance. We've been hearing for a long time from the startups that we work with that they're running into compliance requirements late. So they're hearing, hey, you're going to need to get SOC 2 to sell to us 6 months after they needed to hear that they should start doing SOC 2, because it takes 6 months to a year to get some of these compliance frameworks. So we've really been focused on Is our story that we're telling at SaaS Factory aligned with compliance best practices? And can we give you those stories a little bit more clearly if you're going for HIPAA or high trust or some of the more advanced frameworks? And then control plane is always a conversation for us. And I have another talk this year. So Ranjith is going to join me for a compliance talk. Ranjith Raman, who hopefully everyone knows from the show. He's a many-time participant in this show, and also with Michael Beardsley talking about control planes on AWS, which I think hopefully will be a topic we get some questions on today, because I'd love to dig into control plane more as well. That's it.
That's it. Right. So,
That's all.
I also have a couple of re-event sessions. I'm not going to plug them because they're not SaaS related, but
come on, do.
Well architected serverless and chaos engineering is the stuff.
It is SaaS related. How is it not SaaS related?
Well, it could be, yeah, for sure. But it's not in the SaaS track, at least.
Right.
All right. So let's jump into some questions. So as I mentioned, we have already received some questions from viewers. We had a survey before this, so I'm going to jump into the first one straight away. So this one is from Darth. Let's call him Darth only to make sure we're not infringing on copyrights. So how do you realize fine-grained access control on a DynamoDB table that is called by a Lambda function, invoked by API gateway, and authenticated with Cognito user pool?
Yeah.
This is definitely up our alley.
Yeah.
If it's okay that I'm just, jumping in.
Go for it.
Absolutely.
We see today organizations struggling to create granular security configurations for their cloud applications, even if they're trying to do a good job. And excuse me, I don't mean to do shaming to anyone in AWS, but managed policies at AWS it's not hard, it's very bad. I mean, you look at the name looks very legitimate. Like, I'll give you a simple example. Take a look at DynamoDB read-only. Take a look at that managed policy right now. You're going to see a very long list of permissions to different services and different actions that are not necessary for the simple get item action from DynamoDB. This is the exact example that we're talking about right now. So it's really hard to create granular security configuration, as Mr. Darth is asking about. And what we find that is most helpful with our users today is to analyze what their application is doing. By understanding what the application is doing, we are able to automatically create least privilege policies. We know that manually you're not going to be able to manage it, because if I ask anyone on this panel right now, how many Lambda functions do you have in your application? Gwen, how many do you have? Do you know? How many S3 buckets do you have? Do you know? We don't know. We can't control it. The great power of the cloud, the scalability, is also the security engineers' greatest fear. They're afraid they're not going to be able to control each and every Lambda function trying to read an item of a DynamoDB. And Darth is absolutely right for asking this. This is a huge challenge. You can, if you want to make it granular, you either create it manually yourself, but beware, the bigger your application is, the harder it is going to get. It will be nearly impossible. Please contact me later, and I will see how we can help you and the rest of your friends, the Star Wars friends.
Yeah.
And I do think that this goes to really, like, the question is layered in a way that I really like, because security is applied in layers. And I do encourage people to actually choose tools that give them, like, at least consider the security capabilities of the data layer that you've chosen. I don't know, I have to admit I haven't looked that deeply into DynamoDB's security rules, but I know I use Aurora Postgres. It has row-level security. I think there are several talks on how to use that for multi-tenancy. Not completely friction-free. We've written a long blog on all the issues we ran into, but it helps. It helps to be able to push security concerns all the way to the data layer. And then no matter how many microservices you have, your data applies the security rules for you. It also helps to look at the API gateway. Can you integrate it with your tenant users and apply security rules or even rate limiting, tenant level rate limiting at the gateway layer? Some gateways are fully capable of that. Lambda functions are capable of asking for permission before running and getting the right privileges. So you really want to look at security in every layer, but the best thing is to be extremely tight about it, as close as possible to the data, because then all the rest of the mistakes will matter a lot less.
Yeah, I'm gonna chime in just because Anthony just dropped my blog in the chat, so I feel like it's like a call out, Anthony. Like Bill, you have to go talk about your blog now. So I'll step up. So I love both of what you're both saying. There's really a strong concept to scope your policies down as far as possible, as close to the application as you possibly can. For some implementers, that might be the API gateway, right? So you might be able to scope down your policies at your Lambda authorizer coming to the API gateway. We had Ujwal on a few weeks ago or a few months ago now, maybe even talking about the serverless reference architecture. They've got a really cool example of how they did that in there, where they've terminated the JOTs in the Lambda authorizer, create the AWS credentials and pass those downstream. And those correspond to the specific DynamoDB conditions that restrict access to just the tenant-specific aspects of the DynamoDB tables that you're using, or even to tables themselves if you want to do a tenant table per tenant. But we also have the method that's suggested in this blog, which is implemented at the code level if you're writing microservices, to say at your microservices, only at the very last second, you're going to scope down those policies and say this microservice can access these specific DynamoDB resources for this tenant based on the JOT token that was passed down to it. So there's some cool practices in there, but a lot of different ways to implement them. ABAC, Stephen, it's like you've been reading our blogs. ABAC is another really interesting way to do this. And there's another blog that Oren Ravini wrote around using ABAC to do the same type of thing instead of dynamic policies, to actually use the built-in templating engine that's built into IAM. And I'll post a link to that as well.
By the way, Bill, I'm a huge fan of ABAC, but sometimes I'm worried that with AWS being maybe the top example of a large vendor doing ABAC, you make it look complicated.
That's why we needed a blog. It's hard to figure out on your own. But yeah, it is. There's a lot of complications to IAM in general. I think the invent and complexify leadership principle might be in display here. I know we've had some good conversations. I'm really hoping in the future we see IAM still whittled down a little bit and made a little bit easier. I mean, if I had a wish list item, it would be, I want to pass a JOT token to IAM Incognito, and I want it to figure out all of my tenant context and hand it back to me without a bunch of custom wiring, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think a lot of people are probably nodding out there like, wow, that would be a lot easier.
A dream come true.
Right.
Staying on the security topic, then we had another question from unknown user. What are some best practices for securing a multi-tenant application? I know we could probably spend the rest of the show talking about this, but maybe we can go around and just do one or two per expert. You want to go first?
Sure.
Shira?
Yeah, I can give my 2 cents about it. Multi-tenancy is extremely important. This is a request that you as SaaS creators will be getting from your customers who are concerned and need to be compliant and make sure that their data is not mixed with another customer's data. It could get very embarrassing for you if such a thing happens. I think that this is something Gwen mentioned before. It's all about thinking about the architecture of your application. Where is your data stored and how is it protected? So it should definitely, each tenant should have its own unique ID. Data should be preferably kept on a separate resource if possible, and of course always encrypted with different keys. This might sound very trivial. Unfortunately, in real life, it is not. So if I can give like 2 very basic advice, this is what I'm happy to share.
It's good. Gwen?
Yeah, from my experience, well, obviously Shira is absolutely correct, but I want to highlight that the worst security problems that I've seen come from extremely well-intentioned developers trying to do something that the system was not designed to do. So as an example, a lot of times in a multi-tenant system, you end up with 2 different teams at your largest customer on 2 different tenants. And at some point, someone calls you, explains what happens, and say, we really have to merge those 2 tenants and do those things to make sure these users can see this user can see that. And a lot of time, your application was not yet written with merge tenants and preserve security policies and rewrite all the security rules automatically to make it happen. But your support team and developers, they're just like AWS, they're customer obsessed. They will go above and beyond to do it, including doing direct updates to the database, for example. And usually that's where things go wrong. Someone in support mistyped the customer ID. So the developer mistyped the customer ID. And next thing you know, you merge the 2 wrong tenants with each other, and a catastrophe. And so it's not because you build the system wrong in the first place, is that you didn't consider what being multi-tenant would mean from the customer perspective. Tenants are going to be extremely maneuverable. People will want to split tenants, merge tenants. There is a reason AWS ended up with organizations, accounts, roles, all those different ways of splitting and merging and giving people access into each other's stuff. It's because it's needed. So it's needed for AWS. You're going to need it. Just build it from day one so you don't need to have a developer hack it and make mistakes.
Anthony, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I love everything that I've heard so far, and I'm 100% agreement with this. But I want to talk just briefly more maybe tactically, right? I think as engineers, we have the thought process of, okay, we're going to write some specifications. We're going to ultimately let our developers go out and make those specifications become reality. And my suggestion is when it comes to security specifically, you don't do that. Now, you still want to have your specifications. You still want to understand what your security requirements are at all levels of your system that you're producing. But you really want security to be a layer on top of what your developers are doing, right? You want to abstract that away, because I guarantee you, if you rely on your development teams to implement security at the code level, things are going to get missed and or are just going to be wrong. So always try to extract that and have it at a higher tier. Utilize the systems of the platform that you're working with, whether that's IAM, working with JOT tokens, breaking those apart, STS, all the wonderful capabilities that we have at AWS to implement security around the services that you're building versus being in the services that you're building.
Yeah.
Good. And Bill?
Yeah, let me take a really early stage startup take on this, because I think we've talked in a lot of detail about the best practices as a SaaS provider. I think what I'm thinking about though is that initial decision about multi-tenancy. And if you're a startup and you're just building your SaaS application, your greenfield, what's the multi-tenant decisions that you're making right now that you need to decide? And even what does multi-tenancy mean to you? Because silo multi-tenancy is still multi-tenancy. And when I talk to early stage startups, often my first take is, why don't you try silo first?
Yep.
Why don't you build separate stacks for your customers and then start working on this pooled story as you go forward? Now, for certain shops, being able to do true multi-tenancy or pooled multi-tenancy is something they can do out of the gate. It really depends on the staff you have, their experience with SaaS. But often as you're trying to get to product market fit, making multi-tenant decisions are, how can I fastest get to market with something that's still secure, multi-tenant, capable of seamless onboarding, frictionless onboarding, has an observability story where I can actually see all of my SaaS tenants and their current state and the health of their systems without having to do a lot of the heavy lifting that pooled resources might involve, and possibly deferring those till right after product market fit, And then considering, okay, well, I've got 5 customers on board right now. Should I reevaluate my multi-tenant story and make a different decision about the tenant isolation that I've picked? But having the tools that I've built in there, the identity story being rock solid, that metrics and analytics story being capable of dealing with different types of tenant isolation, all of those different things being baked into it. To me, that's the best practice for securing your application, is making those decisions that best fit where you are right now for tenant isolation, and then being able to react to those and build the pieces, because pooled tenant isolation is hard to do. It involves careful planning and dynamic policies. We've had questions about it already. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's not something that's native to understand. So make sure you understand it, have a plan for it. And like Shira said earlier, security is not something that can wait. If you're going to do pooled security, you have to build pooled security in your application before it launches. It's not something you can defer. So make sure you understand the decisions you're making from a security perspective and map those to the stage you're at as well.
Bill, can I ask you a question around that?
Sure.
Right now, like in the startup world that I'm seeing, there's a huge trend toward product-led growth, which basically means that even at the very early stage, someone has to be able to land on your website and click, I want to use your product.
Right.
Yes.
And does that lend itself to the silo model at all? Or do you have to be pooled model if you're going to do a self-serve product-led growth?
That's a great question. And I think you can do both. Both of them are going to have their challenges. We have pretty good examples in our reference architectures of both pooled and siloed deployment for and onboarding for your tenants. So like the EKS reference architecture, which we haven't talked about yet, so I'll plug that while we're talking. That one has a really good story because you can easily spin up a number of different isolation stories in Kubernetes, right? You can have a cluster per tenant, you can have a namespace per tenant, and you could do plain old pooled. You can say, hey, I'm not going to put any network isolation around my tenants. I'm just going to throw all the compute into one bucket. The onboarding story for those is different. Of course, creating a namespace versus creating a cluster are very different scope of work, especially if you do, say, an account per tenant. Well, that's an entirely different scope of work, right? Your infrastructure stack is going to be a lot richer. You're going to be spinning up VPCs and setting up networking, but between that and your control plane, there's going to be a lot of moving parts. Both stories are complicated in their own way. To me, I think where I might, even with product-led growth and even thinking about the context that you're in, I still might cheat for early stage towards silo, because the negative effects of messing up an onboarding versus messing up your security, to me, is a value prop I'd be willing to cheat on. My onboarding story might need a little extra TLC from somebody to fix a broken onboarding attempt, for example, versus, right. So go ahead, Anthony.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think also it's important to note here that this is also a very large business decision that needs to be made here, right? That this is not necessarily just a technology-based decision. I agree with what Bill's saying. I think in many cases, especially with early stage startup or startup in general, that going a silo route is an not necessarily easier way, but a sometimes faster way to get from A to B, where you're covering all of the areas of SaaS that you really need to be thinking about and getting that go to market. But at the same time, there's cost associated with that. So if the cost model, the pricing and packaging of your application that you're building doesn't necessarily support the cost of passing along those resource costs to your individual tenants, then going the silo model wouldn't work in your particular case, right? So there's still a very large business case that has to be made here that helps to define and drive the technology decision ultimately as far as the type of isolation that you're driving for.
It's like we pre-prepared this, but we got a question from Liam on exactly that. What should be the driver?
I do feel like you need, it's not at the technology level, it's not an either or. And I really encourage everyone, your business, no matter what I tell you today, is going to need both. You will have customers who will have extra special requirements. You will sometimes have a customer that will just ask you, can you just recover me? I'm messed up, can you recover my data from last week? You need to be able to isolate tenants in different levels from day zero. And but also your business, no matter if they know it now or not, they will ask for a multi-tenant system as well for cost reasons, for customer experience reasons. So like the thing we did back at Confluent, we invested not in day zero, but let's say year one, in what we call the unified architecture. And I really honestly believe it's not that hard, and there is no reason not to start building things so the same tenant can be part of the pool, and you have the tooling to pull them out. Same thing, put someone who is isolated back together. And it does apply itself to, someone mentioned in the chat, tiering. Different customers will pay different things. Some of them will need to be replicated across the globe. Some of them will need 3 AZs. Some of them will be cheapos, and you're like, okay, we'll put them on the database. That's one of these. They agreed to lose their data. It's a test environment anyway, kind of thing. So you really want, as a technologist, to build something that will give your business the flexibility to make decisions that they will need to make down the road.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that actually relates with the question that we had on the screen a few minutes ago that I believe Liam asked. I think that, and Gwen, this relates to what you asked about the PLG. PLG is a business decision. You can go that way for different reasons, if it suits your company or not, or you can try and then decide it's not the right decision for your company. So definitely this is a business decision. And I can say that on my end, I don't make decisions as the CEO, I don't make decisions about the tech stack, but I do know what are my requirements and what kind of experience I want to provide to our users. If I want to create a PLG experience, I'm responsible that they will have a smooth experience. And I'm also responsible to do the best I can to protect their privacy and their data. And these are my requirements. And you can implement these requirements in different ways, from the architecture perspective and from the security perspective. And that would be the decision of the CTO or the VP R&D or chief architect to decide how to take the business requirements and translate them into a technical requirement.
Yeah. Sorry, Gunnar. I want to chime in really quickly on that one too, because I love the language, and I would just throw compliance into that mix as well, because it's been so much on my mind. As you're thinking about your customers, what are their compliance requirements for you, right? So making sure you take those into account, regardless, product-led growth aside, that's a business decision, right? That isn't a technical decision like, oh, should we do compliance? No. What are your customers asking you for, and where are you going to land on those? And then you make that technical decision.
And whether you're thinking about it or not, believe me, your customers are. So it's going to come
up. And they will ask you at some point.
Yes, they will.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just wanted to bring up this comment from Just Here to Comment. SaaS is a business-first strategy, so you work backwards from your customer needs, compliance, footprint, etc. So business drivers are definitely involved, and I think that's pretty much where we ended up in the conversation.
And on any SaaS factory engagement, we engage from both the technical standpoint, which of course we're all kind of geeks here, and we're talking about technology, but we absolutely engage from the business standpoint as well, because it is a transformation in many cases, especially if it's a migration that's happening, that has to be a transformation not only on the technology side, but in most cases on the business side as well. So it's very much as important to look at the business decisions and business drivers as it is technology decisions.
So time flies when we're having a panel of experts on. So if you just joined us, well, you missed 40 minutes of the show with these experts. This is Building SaaS on AWS, and we have a special show this week where we simply answer questions from the audience. So I have a question that's related to something we talked about earlier, about RBAC. So please, can you briefly explain the major difference between Ujval's method of tenant isolation and the RBAC, which you just mentioned? I think this is towards you, Bill.
Yeah, and I'll refer you back. We did an episode on dynamic policy generations. I think it was earlier in this season, I believe. Might have kicked off this season even, where I joined, and I did try to break those down. It was a full hour, so I won't try to distill it too far, other than to say A lot of the things with dynamic policy generation we're talking about, it's like a code template, if you want to think about it like that, where you create just a bunch of strings that looks like an AWS policy, and then you're injecting variables into that at runtime. ABAC is another method where there's actually an IAM template that you can use that has variables baked into it. And then you're injecting those variables into IAM and saying at runtime, when I assume the role, I'm going to pass you some tags, because we call them tags like everything else in AWS. You pass the tags into the assume role, and then that's going to be assumed at runtime, and it's going to fulfill those variables for you. That's the difference between those. RBAC, so that's ABAC. RBAC is yet another thing with the role-based access control. I won't dig into that separately other than to say that's another aspect of this, but I think you're mostly asking about ABAC, which is one of the ones I brought up, versus the traditional dynamic policy generation, I think.
Right, that's great. So I have the next question for us, and this is from a person calling himself or herself Lambda. So is there a point to having Lambda functions for each tenant, or can they always be shared? So once again, referring to pooled or silo, basically.
I think this goes back to the same conversation that we've been having, I think, in the last discussion, right? Some of this is going to be a business decision, really, and how you want to structure your application. And it's also not just an either or, as was brought up as well. There are cases where you're going to want to have shared services, including shared Lambda functions. There are cases where you may want to isolate or have siloed-based Lambda functions. Just a quick example. Again, early stage startup or even larger organizations, if you want to more easily be able to understand cost allocation, right? Where which tenants are using your services more, costing more money, or you may even want to be doing chargeback of that to the tenant based on their usage. If you have Lambda functions in a silo-based model where they are per tenant, that roll-up, or to get that roll-up cost for that tenant is an easier prospect to do than it would be if you are using pooled-based Lambda functions. Not to say that it can't be done, it absolutely can, but there's more work that has to be done in order to actually get that information so that you could pass it on. So again, it's a business decision and what you're trying to do and where appropriate.
So you're just playing the devil's advocate here. We recently had an episode with Cloud Zero where this was one of the things we talked about.
Right.
So it is still possible to have the same
Absolutely.
Lambda function for all tenants and still be able to then bill based on usage. So could there be other reasons then to have them siloed, for instance, in terms of quotas or something like that? Could that have an effect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can jump back in, but absolutely, there are many different reasons why this may come up. Again, looking at tiering structures, for instance, for customers as well, you can throttle or set request limits, for instance, on a per Lambda basis that you may want to apply based on tiering structures of your go-to-market strategy, of your pricing and package strategy for the application that you're building, where having the Lambda per tenant would give you much more control over that. So there are absolutely, I think, many different use cases where you may want to use one versus the other, or to have silos.
Anthony said something important that I think everyone should realize. Your product manager is unlikely to come over and say, we need a separate Lambda function per tenant.
Yeah.
And if they do, either you're building function as a service or you did something pretty wrong in the internal communication. They will tell you things like, this tier is only allowed to do that many jobs in a day, or this tier, we need to price based on Lambda minutes. And it's really up to you to take a large pile of Lambda capabilities and YouTube talks and kind of map them to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a comment in the chat about not wanting to share, for instance, temp variables or the temp space between tenants as well. So
yeah, that's a good point.
The more tenants you're going to have, the more complicated it's going to get. So I think as Anthony started, there isn't one single answer for this. It really depends on your business goals and strategy and what is right for right now. You might make a decision right now, and it depends. Thank you so much. It might be different. You might change your mind 6 months from now. And this is the beauty of the cloud. It's so easy to adapt and make changes.
It took 45 minutes for someone to say it depends, but it's usually there on every show.
It's always there.
Yes. All right. So moving on to the next one, we've talked a bit about serverless. So let's talk Kubernetes. The next question is, can you run stateful SaaS applications entirely on Kubernetes, or should you keep it stateless?
Can I talk to that?
Go for it.
Can of worms opening.
I spent 3 years of my life doing exactly this. So we're at Comfort Cloud. I don't think it's exactly a secret. We ran a Kafka on Kubernetes. Kafka is pretty much a stateful system. We actually worked hard to make it slightly less so, but data is data. It has gravity. Let's say that if you have ways to avoid putting state on Kubernetes, your life is going to be much easier. It's not that it's impossible. It's just that the level of expertise that it requires is something that we were not prepared for in day one, and it's, I think, maybe like having children. Nothing you read can prepare you for actually the level of complexity. The network layer is more complex. The storage layer is more complex. You will have exotic routing issues. You'll have errors that you cannot detect because your monitoring is running in the same VPC and there is a different routing if you are external. I think AWS doesn't have this issue, but in Kubernetes itself, just getting a lot of the routing and networking and storage decisions right, it's really complicated. Not impossible, doable, but think hard, what are you gaining from it? At Confluent, we gained enough out of it to make it worse. Essentially I think we ended up having 4 or 5 experts, both in the Kafka team and on our cloud teams, that figured it out through a lot of experiments and testing and so on. But if you can just not do it, your life is going to be a lot easier. You'll see the Kubernetes docs all assume you're running Nginx. The more similar your application is to running Nginx, the more the docs will apply to you, the less gotchas you'll run into, the easier your life will be.
Yeah.
To follow the meme right, I don't think anyone ever got fired for advocating for a stateless application. I'll just say that.
Yeah. It's a question of state management if you're going to do it, though, right, Gwen? I mean, where are you going to store that state? It's no longer just hey, what's our local storage? What's our storage that lives across the life cycle of these containers? And that's a complicated point, right? I mean, I've seen AI/ML examples, right, where you've got to checkpoint your application. If you're running on containers, can I restore to those checkpoints? What's the customer experience when I restore to those checkpoints? You can store your state somewhere, but that doesn't complete the picture for actually doing stateful applications. You have to handle that state gracefully away from your customers' visibility. And that's not an easy story to tell. I've seen it where, there are reasons to do that, right? Long running containers where jobs might take days to complete, like image analyzation or those type of things. They can run for a long time. So you want to make sure your state can be stored. Make sure you have a really good reason to do that, like Gwen said. I think that's a perfect way to put it. Like, the answer is no until you actually absolutely have to, right? Don't do it, right? Sorry, Anthony.
No, and don't forget that managing and holding that state somewhere, as Bill is referring to here, you still have to maintain the fundamentals of SaaS, including that data isolation between tenants. So,
yes.
It just adds extra complexity beyond what you would do in a non-multi-tenant environment.
And we've had guests on the show, SaaS companies, show us examples of how they've done it, built stateful applications using EKS even. So
absolutely.
Besides Gwen example, it's I don't think it's uncommon.
Right. So we are approaching top of the hour. So if you have any questions for our SaaS experts, just pop them in the chat and we'll make sure to answer those as well. So I'm just looking through the list of questions. Let's see what we haven't.
I have a question for Gwen. Gwen, I'm just going to make this a leading question. You've had a whole probably 20 or 30 different episodes on your YouTube channel, maybe, for the SaaS developer community. For this audience, do you have a favorite episode you might want to point them to, or something that really stands out that this audience would be interested in watching?
Let's see. It's hard to pick between your favorite.
Picking between your kids.
But if I had to recommend two, I think, okay, I'm going to go with maybe
three.
Yes. So we have one around provisioning and how having a Terraform that can provision your stack all the way to self-serve experience and doing it both multi-tenant and siloed and based on the customer tier and the entire journey it took there. I think that will be extremely relevant to people here. We had one on, actually we had two on access controls, one from someone at Auth0 talking about Zanzibar, and then one with my team talking about just the different options and when would you use ABAC versus RBAC. And then we had a good one on it was just me, so I'm kind of putting my own horn here, but it ended up being popular. I talked about the API economy and the fact that as a SaaS, a lot of times what your product is actually your APIs and how to think about the experience you're providing there. And we also had an episode about how to secure them. So I think, I promoted way more than one, but...
So just go watch the whole channel is the takeaway. And there's a lot of great content out there. If anyone hasn't gone over there, I posted a link earlier. I'll post it again. There's really a lot of nice content, and it's a great experience. And joining the Slack channel as well has been eye-opening to me. It's been tough to find places where developers can talk to one another and SaaS. And it's a struggle we've had as a team as well. That things are very transactional in terms of your conversations about SaaS. But unlike business users who you can easily throw a rock and you can find 10 different message boards to talk about the business behind SaaS, the technical side of this, there's still very common stories like what we're talking about today, and finding places to talk to other SaaS developers and SaaS builders about those stories has been sort of lacking in the community. So I'm excited about the community, and I'd encourage you all to jump on and join if you can.
Yeah, and I want to give an example of how important the community is. When I first set up my own AWS account for my multi-tenant, I made a lot of mistakes, and some of them were avoidable and easily avoidable. If only I just took some of the blueprints that AWS provided, I would have probably had a lot less trouble. But I looked at it and said, oh, there's a lot of components. They all cost a lot of money. AWS has interest in me having all those components. How do I know that I really need them? And I went and did my own thing. A lot of it was absolutely wrong. And I learned that it's wrong by talking to people in the community who did it before and could tell me, oh, no, you really need the NAT right over there. Otherwise, when you need to authenticate via Google, you will not be able to make that external call over to Google. Now I know. Fantastic.
Right.
Power of the community.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I have a question I want to bring on that I think Shira and Gwen can probably answer from their SaaS building experience, and maybe Bill and Anthony can give some insights to what they're seeing from customers they've engaged with. So how do you price your SaaS tiers without having proper usage data? So I guess it comes from building a new SaaS product, launching it to market, and then basically setting a price for it.
So again, I think it's more of a business decision, at least at the beginning, even later when you understand how much it costs. But if you're building a SaaS product and you're not sure how much to price, just go and see what are your competitors doing. And you will find that at the end of the day, they do very similar things. Personally, when I had discussions about pricing, I went and asked different users what would be the best way to price in their opinion. And when talking about a SaaS, cloud SaaS product, some say they really like to pay per percentage of their AWS bill, and some said, other things. So it's really important to hear what your customers are willing, how are your customers willing to pay, and then see what makes sense on your end. And also, don't be afraid to change it. It's okay for a startup to make changes in their pricing model. Personally, I can say that Solvo is looking at certain, to a certain extent, at the data usage or the consumption on our platform. But the good thing, and this relates to the PLG question we had before, this is the power of starting with a free trial or some kind of a freemium tier, because it also enables you as the software provider to better understand what is this going to cost you on your cloud infrastructure, and then make sure you're giving the right and fair price for your product.
I would also say that this is a place that you may want to talk to your investor, as if this is one place where they are kind of aligned with you, and they have seen a lot of those before. From an engineering point of view, what Shira just said, your CEO will want to experiment with pricing. Your salespeople will want to build targeted discounts, custom pricing cards. Like there's going to be, like,
not to mention private offers on the AWS marketplace.
Yes, exactly. So you need to think about, I'm actually not just throwing a number and sending stuff to Stripe. I am building some kind of a billing infrastructure that gives us flexibility to do pricing experimentation, just the way you probably have kind of a feature flagging thing to do product experimentation. Pricing experimentation is a huge, huge part of it. And I want to plug my absolutely favorite book. Everything I learned about pricing comes from that. And I had the pleasure of working with someone who worked with one of the authors. Monetizing Innovation tells you how to have product conversations with your customers that reveal pricing preferences, which is exactly what you need. And what Shira said, like Shira just gave a lot of good ways to get this information, and the book has 50 other good tips there.
Nice.
Great. All right, so it's time to wrap up. Bill, Anthony, you didn't get a chance to answer, but I think
they covered it very well.
Yeah, that's great answers. Yeah.
So with that, it's top of the hour. I want to thank all of the guests and all of the viewers. We had a lot of viewers and a lot of comments and questions come in, so that was great. Looks like this is something we might have to do more often, So
yeah, absolutely.
Gwen would have to wake up very early, but I'm fine with doing this again.
Yeah, I think this is why we have a community, so a lot of people can come here, and I will not have to wake up very early that often.
So Gwen, Shira, thank you very much for joining us. Anthony, Bill, thanks for joining, as always, the show. And finally, thanks to all the viewers. This has been great, and see you again in 2 weeks. What's the topic, Bill, in 2 weeks?
I believe we're going to have Alex Pulver on, and he's going to bring in one of his partners to discuss, I think, Front Egg, if I'm remembering it right. In another Israeli company, I believe, Front Egg. Yeah.
Oh, so, great company. Yes.
Yeah, we're continuing the theme, and he's going to come on and talk about what they've built.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.